Thank you for joining me. I'm Scott Ryan. Cassandra Parker, a 22-year-old woman and a mother of an infant child, was murdered yesterday. She just happened to be living with a psychopathic NFL star of the Kansas City Chiefs. Javon Belcher, a name that should live in infamy, but judging by the way that the media is covering this, it's more like he's a victim as well. We're talking about the Kansas City Chief who yesterday shot and murdered his live-in girlfriend, the mother of his infant child, and then went on to work, went to the Kansas City Chiefs stadium or training facilities, I'm not sure which, but he thanked the people and the staff for giving him a chance. So then he proceeded to go and shoot himself there on the premises afterwards. But if you look at the NFL.com, it's like there's a memorial for him there. There's pictures of from taking over his past career, showing him doing charity work and such, signing autographs. And we hear the word tragedy expressed frequently to describe what happened here. And very little, I mean, there was one person, TJ, on ESPN, plaudits to him because when they came out of the package, he did say, let's not forget that this man is a murderer, that this man murdered his girlfriend. Because, I mean, the way they're reporting this, it's just unbelievable. And actually at the end of the package on ESPN, after they were talking about how inexplicable this was and what a great guy Javon Belcher was, they didn't fail to mention that he, quote unquote, he did like his guns, but he did like his guns. Now, we've had guns in this country for a couple hundred years, and people weren't doing this like they are now. It's become an epidemic. But it would have nothing to do with culture, mind you, the way that these people were raised, the environments, the violence in films and video games. They live these things out vicariously to the point where our culture is desensitized to brutal acts of murder and trivialize it. It would have nothing to do with that. They reported as though the guy everything was going well. He was a wonderful man, but, eventually those guns just got to him. It was like some contracting a virus. Eventually the guns made him do it. Then you have the concussions. They'll probably look for an opportunity. The left will be asking the question whether perhaps Belcher suffered too many concussions and then use that as a way to go after football and eventually ban it for that. I'm sure that the concussion played a part in his decision to go and murder his girlfriend. You can count on that. You can take that to the bank. That's coming next. The guns and the football. Those are the greatest threats that we face as a nation. And then after that, they had an interview on ESPN of Ndamukong Suh, the defensive player for the Detroit Lions, the one who became somewhat notorious for last Thanksgiving of 2011, where he, after a play against the Green Bay Packers, I forget who it was he did it to, but he kicked the guy rather viciously, stepped on him. It was Aaron Rodgers, if I'm not mistaken. And he was ejected from the game. This was after the play while he was on the ground. Now, it was really disgusting. It really made me want to puke when I'm listening to this Ndamukong Suh do this interview. And he's done it more often than that. That was only one incident. This guy is sick in the head. And actually, I'm surprised. I remember saying to my wife that Thanksgiving, it is not a question of if this guy is going to be in prison for murder. It's a question of when. And I am surprised that he wasn't the next one to kill somebody, but there is nothing more nauseating than having to listen to these people coming out with their apologies and how they promise it's never going to happen again and how they portray themselves as the victims as well as the women whom they beat to a pulp or murder. And people just give them second chances and third chances until somebody dies. Somebody's got to die, and that's how it ends. But there's something wrong with this Ndamukong Suh. It's like when you're talking to, I've read about serial killers, how many times they look back at their past and there were certain traits, like they like to abuse animals as children in some cases. I'm not talking about hunting. I'm talking about like torturing dogs or cats or whatever have you. There's something in their sick heads that really started a long time ago, and the evil progresses from there. But you can see those warning signs. You know, you see a child, there's something wrong there if they like to torture to death little creatures and get some sort of pleasure out of it. And when I see what I saw with Ndamukong Suh, I'm not saying the guy's a serial killer. I'm sure he's not. But I do believe that there is some major, major issue there that cannot just be palliated by excuses and apologies. And it's only a matter of time, because it's going to happen again. That's only a moment that we saw, unfortunately. But if he's like that on the field, I'm pretty convinced that he takes it off the field like that too. And I'm telling you, you can't turn that on and off. You don't have control over something like that. It's only a matter of time. Look, it's getting to be cliche. I mean, they all give these interviews like Sue just did, where it's one thing, you know the camera's coming, you know why you're being interviewed, because you're being accused of being a quote unquote dirty player. It doesn't really take much to be able to maintain your composure and talk like you're freaking Mr. Rogers for 10 minutes during an interview. It's another thing when you're in the heat of the moment and you're doing your job and you're not thinking about those things and you're on that football field, or when you're with your wife and your children. That's when the character or lack thereof is revealed. And it's just getting ridiculous. You know, we keep hearing the same descriptions, the same platitudes about these people after the fact. Oh, Mike Tyson, he was just a young, immature man. Hardworking, came from a bad background. But he was a good guy. Until he beat Robin Givens within an inch of her life and bit off Holyfield's ear in the middle of the boxing match. Oh, OJ, he was such an affable man. Everybody, so generous. Everybody loved him. Until he sliced up his wife and Ron Goldman into pieces and left them there in a pool of blood. I spent a good deal of time volunteering in an after-school program when I worked in downtown West Palm Beach for a few years, and I would go into the inner city in the after-school program held at the Salvation Army and tutor children in the hood, as they called it. These were children between 1st to 5th grade, basically. And in most cases, there were no fathers. They were living in the ghetto, and they had nobody. And this was a program to tutor. We would tutor and study with them, and played football and basketball, and just spent some quality time with them. And that was something that was a real blessing to me, more than it was, or just as much as it was to them. But I remember these children. We would have a lesson after the sports. And I remember in one of the discussions, the children were asked, these are very young children between, like I said, 1st and 5th grade. Somehow the question of video games, how many of you like to play video games, came up, and most of them raised their hands. And the gentleman giving the lesson asked them what their favorite video games were. And most of these children, I mean, we're talking 7 years old on up, they're all saying Grand Theft Auto, true crimes. These are the most violent, brutal games that exist. These are actually supposed to be for adults, but obviously they're not good for anybody. They're not good for adults either. They simulate carjackings, for example, where you pull out the people, you take a club, and you beat the living hell out of them, and blood is splattering everywhere. You kill cops, you carjack, you murder people. And it's trivializing it, is treating it with levity almost. It is taking children from that age who have no father, have no parental guidance, one parent family, often, they're raised by the state, living in hellish conditions, going to schools where they're indoctrinated, and you're taking them home and they're watching violent movies, playing video games, simulating vicariously so they can learn at the age of 7 years old on up. Now, I don't know how they afford these PlayStations and Xboxes and these expensive games in the first place. That's a whole nother, that's paid for in many cases by you, the taxpayer. That's a whole different issue. I mean, these are the poorest of the poor. These are the ghettos. So I was somewhat amazed at how all these kids have these games. We'll leave that for another discussion, but I don't know where this Javon Belcher came from, but there's a good chance in the NFL, many of the players, especially in the African-American community, are from places like, if you take, they're Belle Glade, Florida, near me, Belle Glade and Pahokee. There are more players in the NFL from Belle Glade and Pahokee than any other city in America. I mean, Santonio Holmes is one. Just off the top of my head, there's Fred Taylor. I mean, some of the greatest players. But in many cases, these are kids that are growing up in the ghetto. They are poor, and they are working, doing what they can to get out of there, and they're making successes out of themselves financially. They're coming into a lot of money, and they're working hard to get there, and that's their way out. Most of these people in the NFL, most of these African Americans, did not come from a two-parent family home. Many of them, I would venture to say, are being raised by these rappers who, as a matter of course, refer to women as bitches and hoes and teach them that they're nothing more than like property animals to be used however they see fit. And most of them are raised in that culture. And that's just a sad fact. I don't know how Javon Belcher was raised. I don't know for a fact how Ndamukong Suh was raised. But I can tell you there's a good chance that they were not raised in a balanced environment, in a loving home. And there's a good chance that they were exposed to many brutal things growing up that would almost destine many people to a life of violence. But everybody, I just want to leave you with this. Be careful with your guns, okay? If you pick up your guns, you are susceptible to that virus that just might make you snap and brutally murder people. So thank you for joining me. I'm Scott Ryan.